The air inside the county courthouse felt heavy, as though every breath carried the weight of 100 unspoken questions. The muted shuffle of papers, the low squeak of a leather chair, and the occasional cough from the back of the room were the only sounds. Even those seemed intrusive. At the front of the room, the judge sat perched high on the bench, framed by the gleaming mahogany of the courtroom walls. His expression was one of quiet authority, his eyes steady and calculating. He had presided over countless cases in his career, from petty disputes to matters that had drawn national attention. Yet, as he studied the young girl seated in the witness stand, something in his demeanor shifted ever so slightly. It was not pity, not concern. It was curiosity, a curiosity sharpened by the sense that something unusual was about to unfold. She was small, almost swallowed by the wide wooden chair. Her legs dangled above the floor, swinging slowly back and forth, the movement betraying nerves she otherwise tried to hide. A simple blue dress hung loosely on her frame, the hem just brushing her knees. Her brown hair was neatly parted, braided down one side, and secured with a fraying yellow ribbon that might have been tied in a hurry that morning. She didn't look up at the crowd, not even at the lawyers who were poised and ready with their questions. Instead, she stared at her lap, her small hands gripping the smooth edge of the witness stand, as if it were the only anchor she had. Across the courtroom, seated beside his uniformed handler, was the German Shepherd police dog that had become an unspoken symbol of the trial. The animal was large, its muscular frame taut even in stillness. Its ears stood tall, swiveling slightly at the smallest sounds. Its amber eyes were alert yet calm, the way only a highly trained canine could be. The polished brass badge attached to its harness glinted faintly under the courtroom lights, a silent reminder of the role it had played in the events that brought everyone here today. The dog was not supposed to be the center of attention, at least not in this moment, but more than a few jurors found their gaze drifting toward it. There was something disarming about its presence. A few seats away, a court reporter's fingers paused above the keys as she glanced at the animal, then back at the girl, sensing a subtle but undeniable connection between the two. The judge, too, noticed. He leaned slightly forward, resting his forearms on the bench. "Let's proceed," he said in his deep, steady voice, though even that carried an undertone of anticipation. The prosecutor, a tall man with neatly combed silver hair and an impeccable suit, stepped forward, his notes in hand. His tone was gentle when he addressed the girl. "Can you tell us your name, sweetheart?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence was immediate and thick. Someone in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. She lowered her gaze even further, as though the grain of the wood beneath her fingers had suddenly become fascinating. The prosecutor didn't press. Instead, he smiled faintly. "It's all right. Take your time. We're all here to listen when you're ready." The girl swallowed hard. Her eyes darted briefly toward the dog. The moment her gaze landed on it, her swinging legs slowed, and her grip on the stand loosened slightly. The change was subtle, but noticeable enough that the handler, a broad-shouldered man in a dark blue uniform, straightened in his seat. His eyes followed hers. The judge noticed, too. In the second row of the gallery, a journalist scribbled in quick, uneven strokes, capturing the small yet significant details, the shift in the child's body language, the subtle acknowledgement. From the K-9 handler, the way the courtroom's energy seemed to bend toward that silent exchange. The prosecutor tried again. "Do you remember the night we talked about before? The night when—" He paused, glancing at the defense table, careful not to say anything that might draw an objection. "When something happened and you were there to see it?" She nodded faintly, but still didn't speak. This time, her eyes didn't go to her lap. They slid back to the police dog. The dog didn't move, didn't make a sound, but its gaze was locked on hers in a way that made it seem less like an animal and more like a sentient presence, one that understood something the rest of the room didn't. The handler's jaw tightened. The defense attorney, a younger man with sharp features and a restless pen tapping against his legal pad, followed the girl's line of sight and raised an eyebrow. He turned slightly toward his client, who was seated beside him, hands folded tightly together. Neither spoke, but their mutual glance was loaded with quiet suspicion. By now, the spectators in the back rows were leaning forward ever so slightly, pulled into the unspoken dialogue happening across the courtroom. It was strange. This wasn't a moment of fiery cross-examination or dramatic evidence reveal. And yet, the tension was so thick, it could have been cut with a knife. The judge's gavel rested within easy reach, but he didn't use it. Instead, he studied the girl as if trying to decode the silence between her and the dog. In decades of service, he had learned that sometimes the moments without words were the ones that mattered most. Outside, somewhere far beyond the courthouse, walls, traffic hummed faintly. A gust of wind rattled the flag just outside the main entrance. But inside, the air seemed still, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Finally, the prosecutor glanced toward the bench. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to take a moment before proceeding with questions." The judge gave a slow nod. "Proceed." The prosecutor stepped back, allowing the girl to sit without pressure. The pause was deliberate, giving her space. But in that space, something shifted again. A barely perceptible change in the girl's expression. Her eyes softened. She glanced once more at the German shepherd, and this time there was a flicker of recognition in her gaze. She wasn't afraid of the dog. She knew it. The dog's head tilted slightly, just enough for its handler to tighten the lead. The handler looked from the dog to the girl, then back again, as if caught in the middle of an exchange no one else could fully hear. The judge straightened in his chair. In that instant, the quiet wasn't just about hesitation anymore. It was about something building, something waiting to break the surface. What no one realized was that the moment was already set in motion. The next thing the girl did would take the trial in a direction no one, not even the seasoned judge, could have predicted. And it would start with her not speaking to the humans in the room, but to the police dog watching her every move. The trial had been on the front page of the local paper for weeks. It wasn't every day a small-town courtroom hosted a case with stakes this high. The alleged crime was more than just a burglary. It was a violent break-in that had left a man hospitalized, a house in shambles, and the community on edge. The accused, a wiry man in his early 30s named Eric Dawson, had been painted by the prosecution as a career criminal, a repeat offender who had finally been caught red-handed. His arrest had been the work of Officer Kincaid and his highly trained German shepherd, Rex. According to the official report, Rex had tracked Dawson from the crime scene through 2 backyards, cornered him near an alleyway, and held him at bay until backup arrived. To the casual observer, the case seemed open and shut. The suspect had been found near the scene, with stolen property allegedly in his possession. The victim's injuries were serious enough to inflame public opinion, and the presence of a police dog in the arrest gave the prosecution an image of precision and reliability. Who could argue with a loyal canine's tracking skills? But behind the confident statements and neatly prepared evidence, cracks had begun to appear, faint at first, like hairline fractures in glass. The defense attorney, Michael Brennan, had been quietly gathering testimonies from neighbors and reviewing hours of body cam footage. In those recordings, he noticed something peculiar. There were moments when the canine's behavior didn't quite match the handler's account. A few seconds of hesitation here, an unusual glance there. The girl's name had come up during one of these interviews. A neighbor mentioned that she'd been outside the night of the incident, playing on her porch before her parents called her inside. She had seen something with the dog, but when pressed for details, she grew quiet and refused to say more. At first, Brennan assumed it was just a child's reluctance to talk about a frightening event. But then he learned that her late uncle had been a canine trainer, the very same man who had worked with Rex years ago before retiring from the force. That detail had changed everything. By the time she was called to testify, the tension surrounding her role in the case had become one of the trial's most talked about elements. Reporters whispered about her in the courthouse halls. Spectators wondered if her testimony would be a formality or a bombshell. And then there was the matter of the dog itself, allowed in court because it was considered both evidence and a witness of sorts. From his seat at the defense table, Brennan kept his eyes on the girl. She was small, unassuming, but there was something in her body language that told him she was holding more than she'd let on in pretrial interviews. Across from him, the prosecutor, Daniel Fletcher, projected calm confidence. Fletcher had built his reputation on methodical questioning and a knack for making even the most uncertain witnesses seem reliable. To him, the girl's presence was just another step toward sealing the conviction. The judge, meanwhile, was not so easily swayed by either side's quiet confidence. He'd seen cases crumble over the smallest overlooked detail. The girl's connection to the dog intrigued him, and while he wouldn't let speculation guide his rulings, he also wouldn't underestimate the power of a single unexpected truth. Officer Kincaid, seated beside Rex, kept his gaze forward. His posture was rigid, almost military, and his grip on the leash was firm. Rex, on the other hand, seemed at ease, at least to the untrained eye. But Brennan had noticed the subtle shift in the dog's ears and head every time the girl looked at him. It was as if the animal recognized her, not just as a familiar human, but as someone who had once been part of his training life. "Call your next witness," the judge instructed. The prosecutor rose. "The state calls Emily Carter to this stand." The courtroom's stillness deepened as the bailiff guided the girl to her seat. Her feet barely touched the floor when she sat. She was sworn in with a quiet, almost timid "I do," and then the questions began. Fletcher's opening was careful, almost rehearsed. He asked about the weather that night, what she had been doing before the incident, and whether she remembered hearing anything unusual. Emily answered in short phrases, her voice barely above a whisper. "And did you see anyone you recognized near the victim's house?" Fletcher asked, his tone warm but deliberate. Emily hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the dog again. Brennan noticed. So did Kincaid. "Yes or no, Emily?" Fletcher prompted. The girl's fingers tightened on the wooden rail of the witness stand. I saw the dog." The answer drew a few puzzled glances from the jury box. Fletcher smiled slightly, as though indulging a child's tangential thought. "Yes, Rex was there that night. But I'm asking about people. Did you see the man who was caught by Rex?" Emily looked down at her hands. "I saw someone," she said, "but—" Her voice trailed off. Fletcher leaned in slightly. "But what?" She glanced toward the judge, then toward the dog. "I think the dog stopped. That made the entire room shift." The court reporter's fingers froze mid-keystroke. Brennan straightened in his seat. Even Fletcher's confident expression flickered for the briefest moment. "What do you mean?" "The dog stopped?" Fletcher asked, his voice losing a hint of its earlier warmth. Emily bit her lip, clearly unsure if she should continue. She didn't look at Fletcher when she spoke again. She looked at Rex. The German shepherd's ears lifted. The handler's grip on the leash tightened. "I can't say yet, Emily," murmured. "Not until—" She paused, as if weighing her next words. "Not until I ask him something." A ripple of whispers moved through the gallery. The judge tapped his gavel once. Order. Let the witness continue. Brennan leaned back in his chair, hiding the faintest smile. He didn't know exactly what was about to happen, but he could feel the balance of the trial shifting. Something about the girl's tone, her deliberate choice to address the dog, told him that whatever she was holding back could be the crack that split the prosecution's case wide open. And in that moment, as all eyes turned toward the small figure in the witness stand and the silent, watchful dog across the room, it became clear that this was no ordinary testimony. The truth, or something very close to it, was about to emerge, and it wouldn't come from the humans in the room. It would come from the bond between a little girl and a police dog, forged years before this night, and sealed by a command only they both understood. The air in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer the kind of silence born from formality. It was the taut, breath-holding kind, where every person seemed to sense they were seconds away from witnessing something they might never forget. Emily Carter sat in the witness stand, small hands gripping the smooth edge of the rail in front of her. Her fingers pressed so hard into the wood that her knuckles blanched. She wasn't looking at the prosecutor, the jury, or even the judge. Her gaze had locked, unwavering, on Rex, the German shepherd who sat like a statue in the corner, his handler's hand wrapped tightly around the leather lead. The dog didn't move. Not a twitch, not a shuffle. But something passed between them. Not the casual acknowledgement you might see when a stranger looks at a dog, but something deeper, sharper recognition. The prosecutor, Daniel Fletcher, cleared his throat, hoping to bring her back to the moment. "Emily," he said softly, as if coaxing her away from a dangerous edge, "I asked if you could tell us more about that night. You said the dog stopped. Can you explain what you meant by that?" Her lips pressed together. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, slowly, she looked down at her lap. The courtroom, expectant, waited in silence. "Emily?" Fletcher tried again. Her voice faltered. "I don't want to talk to you." A ripple moved through the spectators. Fletcher frowned, caught off guard. "You don't want to talk to me?" Emily shook her head slightly, still looking at her hands. "I want to talk to him." The him was obvious. Even before her chin tilted toward the corner, every pair of eyes in the room had already drifted toward the same spot. Rex. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward, as if he understood his role in the exchange. His amber eyes locked. On Emily's, Officer Kincaid shifted uneasily in his chair. The judge leaned forward, his deep voice cutting through the murmurs. "Miss Carter, you understand that Rex is a police animal, not a person, yes?" She nodded. "I know." "And yet," the judge continued, "you wish to address him directly?" Emily nodded again. "He'll answer me." That statement landed like a stone in the middle of a still pond. Jurors glanced at each other, unsure whether to be skeptical or fascinated. The defense attorney, Michael Brennan, suppressed the urge to smirk. Whatever was about to happen, he had a feeling it wouldn't help the prosecution. Fletcher hesitated, sensing a risk. "Your Honor," he began. "With respect, this is allowed," the judge interrupted, raising a hand. "If the witness believes she can clarify her statement by speaking to the dog, I will permit it. But let us all remember this is still sworn testimony." Kincaid's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. His grip on the leash remained firm, as though he expected Rex to lunge at any second, though the dog showed no signs of aggression. Emily finally lifted her eyes fully from her lap. The shift was small but noticeable. The timid, shrinking posture she'd held since taking the stand seemed to straighten just a little. She was still a child, still fragile, but there was a quiet determination in her face now. She turned toward Rex, ignoring the rows of curious eyes fixed on her. "Do you remember me?" she asked softly. The words were barely above a whisper, but the courtroom microphones picked them up clearly enough. The dog's head tilted, just slightly, as if adjusting his focus. His tail, still moments before, made a single slow sweep along the floor. The reaction was subtle, but it did not go unnoticed. Brennan watched intently from his seat, sensing the delicate balance of the moment. This was not the erratic behavior of an untrained animal. It was deliberate, almost controlled. Rex wasn't simply reacting to a voice. He was acknowledging it. Kincaid shifted again, his jaw muscles clenching. His eyes flicked briefly toward Fletcher, then back to the girl. Emily kept her gaze steady. She didn't look away, didn't fidget. In that instant, the quiet tension between her and the dog felt like a private channel no one else in the room could tune into. The prosecutor broke in cautiously. "Emily, can you tell the court how you know this dog?" She didn't look at him. "My uncle trained him when Rex was just starting." That landed heavily. Even Fletcher, usually unshaken, took a second before responding. "Your uncle was Officer Carter," she said, her voice steadying. "Before he died, he taught me some of the things he taught Rex. Special things." The words special things seemed to hum in the air. The judge, frowning slightly, adjusted his glasses. "Miss Carter, are you implying that you can communicate with this dog in a way others cannot?" "Yes," Emily said simply. A few members of the jury leaned forward, interest piqued. One of them scribbled a quick note. "And you believe this is relevant to what happened the night of the arrest?" The judge pressed. She nodded. "Because I stopped him." The room broke into soft, startled murmurs. "You stopped him?" Fletcher repeated, his brow furrowing. Emily's eyes never left Rex. "Yes, I told him to stop chasing." It was such a bold statement, so clean in its delivery, that for a second it almost didn't seem real. But then Rex shifted again, ears up, eyes locked on her like they were the only two in the room. Kincaid's grip on the leash grew visibly tighter. Brennan sat forward now, the faintest hint of triumph tugging at the corners of his mouth. Fletcher, on the other hand, looked uneasy for the first time. He glanced at Kincaid, who refused to meet his eyes. Emily rested her small hands on the rail, fingers no longer white from gripping. Her voice was calm now. "I can prove it." The judge's gavel tapped once. "Very well. Continue, Miss Carter." And with that, the last shred of normalcy in the trial vanished. Whatever came next was going to change the tone, and possibly the outcome, of the entire case. Because for the first time since the trial began, everyone in the courtroom understood that the next witness wasn't just the little girl on the stand. It was the dog. The stillness in the courtroom was so complete that it felt like time had slowed. Emily sat upright now, her earlier nervousness replaced by a strange calm. She wasn't fidgeting anymore. She wasn't looking down. She was fixed entirely on Rex. The German shepherd sat perfectly still, a living statue in the corner beside Officer Kincaid. His ears were forward, eyes locked on the girl. The tension in the handler's grip betrayed that this was no ordinary interaction. Judge Whitmore leaned slightly forward in his chair. "Miss Carter," he said in his low, authoritative voice, "you said you can prove what you mean. Please, proceed." Emily gave a small nod. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "He knows my voice. He remembers me. And if I give him a command, he'll listen to me over anyone else." A soft murmur rolled through the gallery. The judge banged his gavel once. "Order." Prosecutor Fletcher stood quickly. "Your Honor, I must object to this. Demonstration, whatever it is. This is a courtroom, not a... This is relevant testimony," Judge Whitmore interrupted. Sharply. "Overruled. Continue, Miss Carter." Emily shifted in her seat. She took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Rex's. The dog's head tilted slightly, as if anticipating what was coming. "Rex," she said clearly. The single word was enough to make his ears twitch. His body leaned forward just slightly. Officer Kincaid's hand tightened on the leash. "Easy, boy," he muttered under his breath, though the microphone near him picked it up. Emily waited, letting the quiet settle again. Then she spoke 2 words, short, clipped, deliberate. The effect was immediate. Rex rose from his seated position, his body tensing as though awaiting further instruction. His eyes remained locked on Emily, ignoring the subtle tug from Kincaid's hand. A handler gave a firm command of his own, the kind that should have snapped the dog back into strict obedience. But Rex didn't respond. He didn't even look at Kincaid. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Fletcher's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "Your Honor, this is quiet," the judge said, his gaze fixed on the unfolding scene. Emily leaned forward slightly. "Stay," she said softly. Rex froze mid-step, muscles still taut, gaze unwavering. Kincaid tugged the leash again, harder this time. "Rex, heel," he ordered, voice sharp. The dog didn't move. The silence that followed was electric. The jurors stared openly, their pens forgotten. The court. Reporters' fingers hovered above the keys. Even the bailiff, standing near the judge's bench, seemed caught between duty and awe. Emily looked at the judge now, her voice steady. "That's what I did that night. I told him to stop, and he did. He didn't chase the man they say did it. He stopped." Fletcher quickly stepped in. "Miss Carter, you can't expect this." "Court to believe. I can prove it again," Emily interrupted, her eyes flashing for the first time. She looked back at Rex. "Come." The word was barely out of her mouth before Rex obeyed, taking 3 measured steps toward her, the leash straining in Kincaid's grasp. The handler had to brace himself, both hands gripping the leather as the dog pulled forward. "Rex, heel." Kincaid barked again, his tone now laced with frustration. Rex ignored him. The judge's eyebrows rose, but he kept his expression otherwise neutral. "Officer Kincaid," he said slowly, "is this normal behavior for your K9? Kincaid's jaw flexed. "No, Your Honor." "Has this animal been trained to respond to this witness's commands?" Kincaid hesitated. "Too long for it to be comfortable. Years ago, maybe. Before I handled him." Emily spoke again, her tone soft but commanding. "Sit." Rex sat instantly, still facing her, tail sweeping the floor once. The sound of pens scratching returned as jurors scrambled to note what they'd just seen. Brennan, the defense attorney, stood now. "Your Honor, the defense moves to consider that the witness's statement that she stopped the dog during the arrest has been partially demonstrated here in court." Fletcher shook his head sharply. "This is not a controlled environment." "We can't draw, Mr. Fletcher," the judge cut in. "We just witnessed a police K9 ignore his own handler's direct orders in favor of a witness's commands. That is not trivial." Kincaid's face reddened, and for the first time, he seemed genuinely uncomfortable in the witness chair. Emily leaned back slightly, her expression calmer now, almost relieved. "I told you he'd answer me." Judge steepled his fingers, eyes narrowing. "Miss Carter, what exactly did you say to Rex the night in question?" Emily took a deep breath. "The same 2 words I said just now." "And those words are not part of standard police commands?" "They were part of his early training," Emily said. "My uncle taught them to me when I was little. He said only certain people could use them with Rex." The judge looked at Kincaid. "Is this true?" Kincaid's silence spoke louder than any answer. The tension in the room was now almost tangible. Fletcher's case had been built on the credibility of the K9's apprehension, but here was a child showing the jury that the dog's actions could be influenced by someone other than his handler. And not just influenced, overridden. Brennan let the silence stretch before speaking. Your Honor, I think it's clear that this testimony goes to the heart of whether my client was truly apprehended through impartial police procedure. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, his expression unreadable. We'll proceed carefully. But I agree this line of testimony is relevant. Miss Carter, you may continue. Emily glanced at Rex one last time. The dog remained seated perfectly. Still, eyes locked on her. For all the world, it looked as though he was waiting for her next word. She didn't give it, not yet. Instead, she folded her hands on the rail in front of her and looked back at the judge. That night, the man they caught wasn't the man who hurt that family. The real one got away. I saw him, and Rex would have caught him if I hadn't stopped him. The room erupted into gasps and whispers again, and this time, the judge didn't stop them right away. He let the weight of the statement settle, knowing full well that the case had just taken a turn that no one, perhaps, not even the girl, could fully control now. The courtroom was still buzzing from Emily's last statement. She sat straight-backed in the witness chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but the small twitch in her fingers betrayed that her composure was costing her. Judge Whitmore finally tapped his gavel, bringing the noise back down. Miss Carter, he said, his voice low and deliberate, you've made a serious claim. If you have more to tell this court, now is the time. Emily's gaze shifted from the judge to the defense table, where Mr. Brennan gave her an almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. Then she looked toward the prosecution, toward Fletcher, who was watching her like a hawk, eyes narrow, waiting for a misstep. She inhaled slowly, gathering courage. I stopped Rex because he was chasing the wrong man. I knew it the moment I saw him running after him. Fletcher's objection came instantly. Your Honor, this is pure speculation. Overruled, the judge said without hesitation. Let her explain. Emily nodded faintly and continued. I'd seen the man who actually broke into the house earlier that night. He was taller, heavier, and he had a tattoo here. She touched the side of her neck. A black snake wrapping down toward his shoulder. The man Rex was chasing didn't have that tattoo. I saw him in the streetlight when he turned back for a second. He was just running, scared. The room seemed to lean closer as she spoke. Brennan seized the moment. Miss Carter, are you saying you were close enough to see these details clearly? Yes, she said without hesitation. I was across the street. My mom had gone inside for a moment to answer the phone, and I saw movement near the house. I saw the first man, the real one, run out the back with something in his hands. But when Rex came, they sent him after the second man. The wrong one. Kincaid shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Fletcher shot him a look, but he kept his eyes fixed ahead. Brennan pressed on. And you knew Rex would listen to you? I'd been around him since I was little, Emily replied. Before Officer Kincaid had him, Rex was my uncle's dog. My uncle trained him. He let me help with simple commands, so Rex got used to my voice. He trusted me. The judge tilted, his head slightly. So on the night in question, you gave him the same 2 words you demonstrated today? Yes. And those words made him stop? Emily nodded. He skidded to a halt. He was close enough to grab the man, but he just stopped and looked back at me. That gave the man time to run into the alley and get away. Then Kincaid caught the other one instead. Gasps and muttered conversations rippled through the courtroom again. Fletcher rose to cross-examine. His voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it now. Miss Carter, you were 8 years old at the time, correct? Yes. And you're telling us that you, at 8 years old, made the judgment that trained law enforcement officers were chasing the wrong man? That you knew better than. They did? Emily met his gaze, her voice steady. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about what I saw. I just didn't want Rex to hurt someone who hadn't done it. Fletcher gave a small, tight smile. Or perhaps you were mistaken. Perhaps you misremembered. It's been years after all. Emily shook her head. I remember exactly. I've never forgotten. Because when they took the other man away, I saw him look right at me. And I could tell he was terrified. Not like someone who'd just attacked a family. More like someone who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Brennan stood quickly. Your Honor, if the witness is correct, this is exculpatory evidence that calls into question the entire arrest procedure. The judge raised a hand. One step at a time, Mr. Brennan. Miss Carter, did you ever tell anyone this before now? Emily hesitated. Her hands tightened on her lap. I tried. I told my mom that night. She told me not to say anything. She said it wasn't safe. Not safe? The judge repeated, his brows knitting. Emily's eyes dropped. A few days after the arrest, we got a note on our doorstep. It said, keep quiet about what you saw. My mom was scared. She wouldn't even let me talk to the police again. A ripple of unease moved through the courtroom. Fletcher rose again, his voice louder now. Your Honor, we can't possibly verify. Mr. Fletcher, the judge interrupted sharply. Unless you're prepared to call the witness a liar under oath, I suggest you let her finish. Emily looked up, meeting the judge's eyes. I kept quiet because my mom told me to. But when I found out this trial was happening, when I heard they were still saying Rex caught the real guy, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. 4. The first time since she took the stand, her voice wavered. I had to tell the truth, even if it's too late. The judge studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. Your honesty is noted. He turned toward the attorneys. We will recess for 15 minutes. I need to speak with counsel in chambers. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. The room exploded into whispers as people rose from their seats. Some jurors glanced at Emily with something close to sympathy. Others looked troubled, scribbling furiously in their notebooks. Rex, still sitting near the witness stand, watched her the entire time. When the bailiff came to escort her out, the dog's tail gave a slow, deliberate wag, as if he understood that the bond they once shared had just changed the course of the trial. The courtroom emptied in a restless shuffle, but the tension didn't leave with the people. Even in the hallway, voices were hushed, as if everyone sensed something pivotal had just been set in motion. Emily sat on a wooden bench near the bailiff's desk, her knees drawn slightly together, her hands clasped. She could hear Rex's claws tapping lightly on the floor as Kincaid led him down the corridor toward the side room where the dog usually waited during recesses. The bailiff glanced at her. You did good in there, he said softly. She managed a small, tired smile. It doesn't feel like it yet. Before she could say more, the side door to the judge's chambers closed, shutting Brennan, Fletcher, and Judge Whitmore into a private meeting. The air in the hall thickened. Inside, Whitmore wasted no time. Gentlemen, we've got a problem. The witness's testimony directly challenges the validity of the arrest that forms the foundation of this case. I don't care how confident either of you are. If the jury believes her, your case starts bleeding. Fletcher leaned forward. With respect, Your Honor, we're talking about a memory from a child, an 8-year-old. This is a high-profile trial. If we start throwing it into chaos over something that can't be verified, Brennan cut in. Can't be verified? We have a police K-9 who stopped mid-pursuit because of her command. That's verifiable. We have her description of a man with a snake tattoo on his neck, something we can check against police reports from that night. And we have an alleged intimidation note which you've conveniently never investigated. Fletcher's jaw tightened. The note doesn't exist anymore. Even if it did, anyone could have written it. Brennan leaned back, letting his words land slowly. Anyone. Like the real suspect, perhaps. The judge raised a hand sharply. Enough. I'll allow cross-examination of Officer Kincaid regarding Rex's training and past ownership. If that corroborates her claim, we may have grounds to reopen certain evidence. Fletcher's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Meanwhile, in the side waiting room, Kincaid sat in a plastic chair, Rex resting loyally at his feet. The officer rubbed his temple. This wasn't how today was supposed to go. The dog shifted, pressing his head gently against Kincaid's leg. Kincaid looked down at him, a pang of guilt tightening in his chest. You listened to her, didn't you, boy? He murmured. Even after all these years. Rex blinked slowly, his tail thumping once. The truth was, Kincaid had known. About Emily's connection to Rex. When he'd first been assigned the dog, the paperwork listed a previous handler who died unexpectedly, Emily's uncle. But he'd never expected it to matter. In all his years on the force, Rex had never ignored an apprehension order. Until that night. When the 15 minutes were up, the bailiff called everyone back. The courtroom filled with an undercurrent of anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. Judge Whitmore took his seat. Officer Kincaid, please return to the stand. The officer walked up, squared his shoulders, and sat. Brennan stepped forward with a measured calm. Officer Kincaid, how long have you been working with Rex? 8 years. And before that? Kincaid hesitated. Before that, he was trained and handled by Officer Tom Carter. Brennan's voice softened just slightly. Any relation to the witness? Yes, he was her uncle. A murmur rolled through the spectators. Brennan continued. So you're aware that Emily Carter had prior contact with Rex? Kincaid nodded reluctantly. Yes, some. Brennan's next question came like a carefully aimed dart. Would you say it's possible that Rex would still recognize and obey her voice, even after years apart? Kincaid's eyes flickered. Toward Rex, then back to Brennan. It's possible, he admitted. K9 South formed strong bonds. A familiar command from a trusted voice could override a pursuit instinct. Under the right circumstances, the admission landed like a weight. In the room, Fletcher rose for cross-examination, but his voice carried a sharper edge now. Officer, are you saying that a trained police K9 could be compromised simply because of a prior relationship? Kincaid bristled. That's not what I said. Rex is highly disciplined. But if a situation was confusing enough, and the voice was someone he trusted from years of reinforcement, it could happen. So you're suggesting that, on the night of the incident, the dog might have ignored orders? I'm saying it's possible he reacted to her voice instead. Fletcher's lips thinned, but he pressed no further. As Kincaid stepped down, Brennan rose again. Your Honor, I request that we call Detective Harlow to the stand this afternoon. He was lead investigator on the original break-in and can testify about other suspects, including whether any fit the description Miss Carter gave. Fletcher objected, but the judge waved him off. Granted. We'll hear from Detective Harlow after lunch. Emily, still seated quietly, glanced toward Rex. The dog was watching her again, head tilted just slightly, as if reading her thoughts. For the first time since she'd walked into the courtroom that morning, she felt a flicker of hope. But hope has a way of drawing out shadows. In the back row of the gallery, a man in a dark jacket shifted uncomfortably. His eyes were locked on Emily. When she happened to glance his way, he looked down quickly, but not before she saw it, the faint curve of a snake tattoo winding up the side of his neck. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth to tell Brennan, But just then, the bailiff announced the lunch recess. People began filing out, breaking the moment. By the time she looked back, the man was gone. She stood slowly, her mind racing. Had she just seen the real intruder, sitting in the courtroom, watching her? Emily's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the railing outside the courthouse. The air was thick with midday heat, and the chatter of people eating at food trucks across the street felt oddly distant, like a scene from someone else's day. Brennan joined her a moment later, a paper coffee cup in each hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost." She took the coffee, but didn't drink it. "Not a ghost, him." Brennan's brow furrowed. "Who?" "The man from that night," she said quietly, glancing around to be sure no one was close enough to hear. "The one who broke in. He was in the back row during the hearing. He has the tattoo." "The snake." Brennan froze. "You're sure?" "Positive." He looked toward the courthouse doors, scanning for any sign of the man, but the stream of people coming and going offered no clue. If he's here, he's either following the trial or following you. Emily swallowed hard. Brennan's voice lowered. "We need to tell the judge and the bailiff immediately. If this guy is the real suspect, his presence here changes everything." Inside the courthouse cafeteria, Detective Harlow sat at a corner table, his badge clipped to his belt. He'd been called to testify in the afternoon, but he'd heard enough whispers in the hallway to know the case was shifting. When Brennan approached with Emily in tow, Harlow looked up. "You've got that look, counselor. What's happened?" Emily recounted the sighting in a steady voice, though her pulse was still hammering. Harlow didn't interrupt, but his expression darkened with every detail. "Snake tattoo," he repeated. "Left side of the neck?" She nodded. Harlow set his coffee down. "That matches a man we questioned early in the case, Victor Lane, known burglar, ties to an organized crew. We couldn't place him at the scene, so we didn't pursue. If he's been sitting in this courtroom, that's not coincidence." Brennan leaned forward. "Can you pull him in?" "I can try, but I'll need probable cause," Harlow said. "Seeing him here isn't enough. But if he makes contact with you, or tries to intimidate you..." He let the sentence hang. Emily's stomach turned. "So I just wait for him to come after me?" Harlow's eyes softened. "Not if I can help it. Just stay in public spaces, stick close to your attorney, and if you see him again, let me know immediately." The afternoon session began with a renewed tension. Detective Harlow took the stand, his deep voice steady as he answered Brennan's questions. "Detective, did you investigate other suspects besides the defendant in this case?" "Yes, several." "And did any match the description Emily Carter gave?" "One did. Victor Lane, 34 years old, Caucasian male, approximately. 6 feet tall, muscular build, with a distinctive snake tattoo along the left side of his neck. Was Mr. Lane ever charged?" "No. At the time, we lacked physical evidence tying him to the crime scene." Brennan nodded slowly. "So if the witness's description matches him, and he has a known criminal history, he could be a viable alternate suspect." "Correct," Fletcher immediately objected. "Speculation." The judge overruled him. "A jury will decide the weight of this testimony." As Harlow stepped down, Emily scanned the gallery, searching for the man. For a moment, she thought she imagined him entirely, until her gaze caught on a shadowed corner near the exit doors. There he was, leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, watching her, her breath hitched. This time, Rex noticed too. The dog's ears pricked, his gaze locking on the man. A low, almost imperceptible rumble came from his throat. Brennan saw it and followed her line of sight. His jaw clenched. The man gave a slow, deliberate smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, and then turned, slipping through the exit before anyone could stop him. During the short break before the next witness, Brennan pulled Harlow aside. He was here again. Rex reacted to him. Harlow swore under his breath. "That's enough for me. I'm getting a unit to sweep the area. If he's hanging around, we'll find him." Emily felt a strange mix of relief and dread. If they caught him, the truth might finally surface. But if they didn't, he'd know she was onto him. The remainder of the session passed in a blur. Emily barely heard the legal back and forth. Every creak of the gallery benches made her heart jump. Every movement in her peripheral vision felt like a threat. When the judge finally adjourned for the day, Brennan insisted on escorting her to her car. Rex padded along beside them, his steady presence oddly comforting. They were halfway across the parking lot when Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. An unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" A low male voice came through, deliberate and cold. "You should have kept quiet, little girl." The line went dead. Emily stopped in her tracks, her heart thundering. Brennan turned sharply. "What is it?" She handed him the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. It was him. By the time they reached the safety of Brennan's office, Harlow was already there, leaning against the desk. Brennan relayed the call word for word. Harlow didn't waste a second. "That's enough for a harassment charge. We can put out a bolo for Lane." Emily sat down heavily, running a hand over her face. "What happens if they find him?" "If we find him," Harlow said firmly, "we question him about the break-in. And if his story cracks, we reopen the case entirely." Brennan met Emily's eyes. "That means your testimony and Rex's reaction could clear the defendant and put the real criminal behind bars." But Emily wasn't thinking about the trial anymore. She was thinking about the man's voice, the quiet menace in it, and the fact that he was still out there. She glanced at Rex, who was lying near the door, watching her intently. She had the unsettling feeling that both of them knew this wasn't over. The morning of the final day of testimony dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself knew a storm was coming. Emily sat in the witness room, sipping water she barely tasted, trying not to let her mind replay the phone call over and over. Brennan stood by the door, going through his notes, his jaw set. "Remember," he said without looking up, "if Lane shows, don't react. Let Harlow handle it." Emily nodded, though her pulse was already quickening. Beside her, Rex sat poised, his eyes moving between her and the door as if he understood the stakes. In the courtroom, the air was electric. The gallery was packed, whispers weaving through the rows. Fletcher sat with his client at the defense table, looking smug as ever. But there was an unease in the way he kept glancing at the doors. Judge Whitaker entered, his gavel echoing once. "We'll resume with the prosecution's final witness." Brennan rose. "Your Honor, before we proceed, the state requests that Detective Harlow remain in the room, as we have reason to believe a person of interest connected to this case may attempt to make contact with the witness during testimony." The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Granted. Detective, you may take a seat." Harlow moved to a chair by the side wall, his eyes scanning the gallery like a hawk. Emily took the stand, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Brennan guided her through the questions, the night of the break-in, what she saw, and the moment in court when she recognized the man in the gallery. Halfway through her testimony, the heavy courtroom doors opened. The sound was subtle, but Rex's reaction was not. His ears snapped forward, his head turned sharply. A low growl rolled from his chest. Emily's breath caught. She didn't have to look to know he was here. Victor Lane walked in like he owned the place. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark jacket collar brushed against the coiled serpent inked along his neck. His eyes found Emily instantly, and that same cold smile. crept across his face. The gallery murmured. Fletcher shifted uncomfortably. Harlow was already moving, but Lane didn't stop. He strolled down the side aisle, as if he were just another spectator looking for a seat. Rex's growl deepened. The dog rose, muscles tense, eyes locked on Lane. Judge Whitaker's gavel cracked. "Sir, this is a closed hearing. State your business or leave immediately." Lane ignored him. "Just here to watch, Your Honor," he said smoothly, though his gaze never left Emily. Brennan's voice cut in. "Your Honor, that man matches the physical description given by our witness and has previously been questioned in connection with this case. We request he be detained for questioning immediately." Fletcher shot to his feet. "Objection. This is highly irregular," but the objection was drowned out by Rex's sudden bark. Sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. The dog stepped forward, planting himself between Emily and Lane, his eyes burning with recognition. It was the same reaction he'd had the night of the break-in. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Harlow reached Lane in 3 strides. "Victor Lane, you're coming with me." Lane raised his hands casually, but his voice carried menace. "Careful, detective. False accusations have consequences." "Not as many as burglary and assault," Harlow shot back. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we have new grounds. I'll be taking him into custody." The judge nodded curtly. "Do it." As Harlow cuffed Lane, Brennan approached the bench. "Your Honor, given the witness's immediate recognition, the K-9's corroborative reaction, and Lane's presence here despite having no legitimate reason, the state moves to reopen the suspect list and pause proceedings until this man can be fully investigated." Fletcher sputtered. "This is outrageous," but Judge Whitaker raised a hand. "Outrageous is a suspect strolling into my courtroom and trying to intimidate a witness." Motion granted. The gavel came down. Outside the courtroom, the tension broke in a flood of movement. Lane was led away, still smirking, but now under guard. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions flying. Emily stepped aside with Brennan and Harlow, trying to catch her breath. "You just changed this entire case," Brennan said quietly. "It wasn't me," she replied, glancing down at Rex. "It was him. He knew before I did." Rex looked up at her, tail wagging once, then returned to watching the hallway like a sentinel. 2 days later, the news broke. Forensic teams had matched Lane's fingerprints to the pry marks on Emily's door. DNA evidence recovered from a dropped glove sealed it. Lane was charged with the break-in, and the defendant, the man who had been on trial, was released. The story made headlines across the state. Police dog's courtroom reaction leads to arrest of true suspect. The following week, Emily found herself back in the same courtroom, but this time, she wasn't there to testify. She was there to see the charges against the wrongfully accused dismissed. The man, a quiet, soft-spoken neighbor she'd barely known before all this, approached her afterward. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You don't have to," Emily replied. "Just live your life. That's thanks enough." As she stepped outside, Brennan walked beside her, holding the door. "You realize you and Rex might have just made legal history." She laughed softly. "I'll settle for a quiet life from now on." Harlow caught up to them at the courthouse steps. "You did good, Carter, both of you." He crouched to scratch Rex behind the ears. "This dog's got better instincts than half the force." Rex wagged his tail again, but his eyes stayed on the crowd, scanning, alert. Emily knew life wouldn't go completely back to normal. She'd always be more aware, more cautious. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't alone. And sometimes, all it took to change the course of justice was 2 simple words. And a dog who remembered exactly who the real threat was.